Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Klint Kesto, who is running to become the Republican nominee for Michigan's 11th Congressional District. He received his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Michigan and his Juris Doctorate from Wayne State University. He was the first Chaldean elected to the Michigan legislature. Welcome, Klint.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So when you served in the State House, can you name a couple accomplishments that you are the most proud of?
Oh, certainly. Well, one of the ones that was challenging, but we were able to get it through the finish line, that I sponsored, was having genocide taught in our state, in all of our schools, and that includes the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide. And why is that important? Because, first of all, our students need to know the history of a genocide, the Armenian genocide, as well as the Holocaust. And the community, especially in Southeast Michigan, but not just that, everywhere in the state. And why is that important for today's day? We could talk about it just being historical and never forgetting. But when you think about it, in 2014 and 15 and 16 and 17 and even today, there's been this uprising of ISIS in the Middle East, especially in Iraq and Syria, and these radical terrorists have targeted Christians and other religious minorities by virtue of their religion, not their anything else, but simply by virtue of their religion. And that is a genocide. Matter of fact, Secretary of State Kerry, during the Obama administration, even said, yep, this is a genocide. Congress at that time had a resolution calling that a genocide. So here we are in modern day, and yet we still have a genocide. And here's why. There was a study done that only about 50% of our students know even about the Holocaust or substantial information about it. That's unacceptable. So that's why I think that that's one of the most important pieces of legislation that I've been able to accomplish in getting done and passing in our state. Another thing that we did was reforming civil asset forfeiture. Now, why is that important? Because we have a Constitution. We have due process laws in our Constitution, and yet they weren't being followed completely. And I love our men and women in blue. I love our men and women in brown, our state troopers, our police departments, our sheriffs. But we have to have uniformity and consistency and give our citizens due process of the law and allowing them to have their day in court when it comes to their property. And we got that done and across the finish line despite its controversy. Those are two substantial pieces of legislation among many that I've been a part of that I think are important in today's day.
Now, was it difficult getting that genocide bill through?
It was difficult because at some point you have to draw lines and draw them for a certain reason. Everybody wanted to throw in every little event and circumstance that has happened throughout history, but they aren't relevant when you talk about genocide education. Genocide education, I think, is, albeit broad, it is narrow to direct attacks on a specific group of people for a specific purpose. The Armenians, the Holocaust with the Jewish community, today, modern day, and they were large, they were historical, of epic proportions in terms of lives lost. We even had the Consul General from Turkey, the government Turkey, come in, hire a lobbyist, fight the bill. Even in some parts of it, the education community was fighting back and pushing back, saying, why do we have to have this mandate? Look, we can argue till we're blue in the face about mandates, their importance, whether they are not important, they shouldn't be there. But at some point, we have to make a determination as to what is important for our children to learn. And those were the difficulties with that piece of legislation. And despite that, Paul, I was able to shepherd the bill through the Michigan House of Representatives, shepherd it through the Michigan Senate, get it to the governor's desk, and we had a bill signing over in Farmington Hills at the Holocaust Memorial on Orchard Lake Road that was historical in nature.
Okay. What is your stance on corporate welfare and crony capitalism?
Well, when you talk about having these, this corporate welfare, we have to look at what exactly are we doing. Are we favoring one company, another company? How are we doing this on the national level? You know, what has happened was this has spiraled out of control, where states are starting to use their taxpayer money to fight against other states. The federal government is also doing that on its own. So we have to get away from this corporate welfare part, create an even playing field. But let's look at what the reason is. Is the reason creating jobs? Then we have to look at how we can have stimulus programs for job creation so that jobs are created for the people, that real life jobs. And what has happened is you see the federal government first starting to use tax money and passing them along to various corporations. And then we've started to see states starting to compete with each other. Now, whether you like these incentive programs or whatever you want to call them, stimulus programs or straight up corporate welfare or not, it shouldn't be the federal government getting involved in competition between states, or maybe it should, because now you're talking about commerce, and the way we are today, we're crossing lines. People are manufacturing in one state and sending it to another. So now we're pinning states against each other. And the states are putting their arms up saying, look, in order for us to compete, in order for us to create jobs, we have to do certain things to draw and attract companies. But I believe that there should not be this uneven playing field that is catering to large box stores or large corporate entities that are only getting their dollars, tax dollars, because of their lobbyists. That creates an uneven playing field for somebody small who wants to get in. It creates an uneven playing field for somebody who's just a taxpayer out there. And at the end of the day, what are the metrics? Now, there are certain programs that do work. They create an even playing field. They allow anybody to get in. That's different. But selecting one or two or three different companies by virtue of that company's name, and there are no metrics, they're just taking money, and that happened a lot during the Granholm era, especially here, with the idea of saying we're going to create jobs, and then the jobs were never created. That part is a problem.
Okay. Back in 2015, didn't you try to require that in order to be eligible to obtain a secure transporter license for medical marijuana, the applicant would have had to paid a minimum of $25 million in annual state excise tax?
No. That was never brought before the committee. That was never introduced as an amendment in front of the committee. There were talks about what we're going to do, and certainly various individuals and stakeholders had ideas. Some of them were into the bill, some of them came up as amendments, and some were just as part of a discussion. That was part of a discussion that never made itself in front of the committee.
Okay.
And by the way, I was the chair of the committee, so we could have brought it up, it just never came up.
Okay. So would it be fair to, would you agree that that would be considered kind of a picking winners and losers if you're setting a $25 million? I mean, basically, you would be setting aside these licenses to tobacco wholesalers, right?
Well, it could have been not just tobacco wholesalers, but others as well. The intent at that time through discussion was saying, look, this is a new industry. We know for certain that there's crime associated with it. We know for certain that there are people who are not reporting what they're doing and other things, not tracking their product, not claiming what they're making. So in order to create a layer of security, so to say, these were suggestions that came up. Ultimately, they're not in. Now, it would have carved out and only been limited to, you're talking about beer and wine wholesalers, spirits distributors, tobacco industry, oil and gas distributors. So there were many out there, but in the proposal that ended up being passed, it is open. At the same time, though, Paul, at the same time, we have to be cognizant about what we're doing in the industry, and we have to make it safe for consumers, especially our medical patients that are requesting a certain product. So there has to be testing. There has to be tracking because law enforcement wants to make sure that everyone's on the up and up and doing things like any other industry. This was an illegal industry that is now transitioning into a regulated industry with parameters and a framework. And so things have to work within that framework. And so we did have input from law enforcement saying we need to know where this narcotic, where this substance is being transported to and from, and we want the people who are reliable and trustworthy in it. Now, we could make any claim and open it up, and as long as we get reliable and trustworthy entities, then they're okay with that.
Okay. So now you're running to be the Republican nominee for U.S. Congress for the 11th District. Why are you running for that position?
I'm running because our system on a federal level is broken. We know that. Our system on a federal level has disregarded our states and our states' rights, and by virtue of that, has disregarded the people. Our federal government has continued to grow and grow and grow, where now the bureaucracy is huge. They're making internal policy on their own, not through any legislators, and it seems like Washington is so far away. I'm running to bring the power back to the people and back to the states. And if you look at the bills that I have that have been passed or have been introduced and passed the House, you can see I've taken the bureaucracy and limited it. I have a bill regarding eminent domain that restricts the bureaucrats in the Michigan state departments, whether it be Department of Natural Resource, Department of Transportation, or others, that say there's a policy that you have to follow. You can't take people's property and simply rely on them to sue you when the property has no value. So we have to hold these individuals accountable as well. Our budget, we passed budgets in the state of Michigan that have paid off debt, put money aside, been balanced, been passed on time, and yet in Washington, we've seen this year. Extend it. Well, let's get people who are willing to do the job. Now, we keep electing the same people. Oh, I'm going to go and fight against every single person there. And where has that gotten us? Nowhere. We keep electing the people who are the same old, same old. Where has that gotten us? Same old legislators. The SOL. And we're SOL. Because either they run in with the establishment and become part of that group and just follow along like sheep, or we get the person who just is going to point their nose in someone else's face. And nothing has gotten done for the people. Nothing. It's time for fresh ideas, cutting-edge policy, innovation, and being able to look forward and say, we are going to do something for the people. I was just a co-chair of a task force, Paul. It's called the Michigan CARES, C-A-R-E-S task force, that looked at our mental health system, our corrections system, our opioid abuse problem, how we treat our veterans in terms of care. And we came out with a report. And the speaker, he entrusted me to be one of the chairs. We came out with a report, and this isn't going to be any report that we just that sits on a shelf and collects dust. We've introduced legislation. We've passed it out of the House. It's currently in the Senate because we took action. Not just action of old, but looking at real problems and finding real solutions. Just like our federal system is broken from a legislative standpoint, our mental health system in our state is broken, and is broken across the country. We can't keep doing the same old thing. We can't keep running the same old plays.
So this bill, what would it do as far as
on our
for the mental health?
Oh, well, number one, we need to open up more psychiatric beds in our hospitals so that there could be care, so that individuals that actually need help and need treatment aren't going to emergency rooms sitting on a gurney, and they're not going to jails sitting behind bars. We need to look at our population within our corrections system, where we pay $2 billion in the state of Michigan. And we're housing individuals that actually need medical psychiatric care, but they're not getting it. And we need to do a better job there. We have people waiting in line for psych evaluations in our jails and our court system, and they're being delayed and delayed and delayed. And one small problem later escalates into a crisis or a severe criminal penalty. You look at our children. We need to invest in making sure we can address mental health issues at a young age where they're identified, so that you don't have the situations like in other places across the country where individuals are falling into a crisis mode and grabbing a firearm and going to a school to kill other individuals. These are the things we have to look at. It costs us $1,200 a day for our psych hospital in Hawthorne, for our juvenile psych hospital, and the average stay is 6 months. Process that, 6 months. And yet, if we were to provide care on a day-to-day basis, it's $300. But instead, we wait until there's a crisis. That's wrong. It's wrong on a lot of fronts. Number one, it's wrong for that individual. Number two, it's wrong for the taxpayers. Number three, it's just bad policy. We need to change that. And I welcome people to look at the report. Google Michigan Cares Task Force, and you'll see 40 topics that we're going to address. It's about 18 pages long, and we're going to address them quickly and expeditiously.
Okay. What is your stance on abortion?
I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, I'm against abortion, and I'm going to take that a step further. When you look at our Constitution, there are certain inalienable rights, and the first one is life. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't get to the pursuit of happiness without liberty, because you need freedom to be able to do that. And you can't get to liberty without the value of life and preserving life. Those are things, inalienable rights granted to all of us. And that's why the importance of life is very important to me. And so I believe in the right to life.
What should we do with Obamacare? Should we repeal fully, or should we modify it? What's your...
Well, first off, it should be repealed fully. Go back to what we had before, but not just settle there. We still need to address those issues of rising costs of individuals that don't have health care, of the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, the cost of surgeries, emergency room costs. All these need to be addressed, deductibles and premiums. Obamacare was the failure. That was the wrong plan. So let's repeal it, and then let's go back to the drawing board and find a solution.
Do you have any thoughts of what might work?
Well, number one, the states should be able to start being able to control their own destinies with health care. That's one. Then they can be accountable to their people. So let's start by giving the control to the states and allowing the states to come up with policy that will help their people. Instead, the federal government takes the money and then tells the state what to do and what they can and cannot do. Let's return that money back to the states and allow them to be able to find solutions. One of them would be looking at our deductibles. Another one would be certain concierge care. Another one would be looking at how we can get more access throughout the state. All of these little things will add up to cost savings for your average user of healthcare.
Okay. President Trump is talking about placing tariffs on steel, aluminum, possibly imported cars. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, tariffs overall, when you start restricting trade or taxing a certain international trade, and I think economists will tell you this, that's why you see so much backlash against the president for these tariffs, are not the free market system. However, when he started making certain carve-outs and exceptions and making certain negotiations, I think that this is the ability for the president to use these as a tool to create an even playing field for our country, and to be able to say our American jobs need to come first, and the time is now to stop taking advantage of us. And we've seen countries take advantage of us. Mexico, China, India, others. So I think that overall the policy of tariffs is not a free market idea. But if the president will use it as a tool to hold other countries accountable and to create the jobs here in our country and to be able to have that stimulus into the economy by more jobs being created here, then I think that that avenue will be fine for him to be able to bring other countries to the table. And by the way, he said this in his campaigning. He said, we are going to put American jobs first. We are going to put our country first. We're being taken advantage of by all these other countries, and it's time to stop. So from that end, I think if he's going to negotiate like he said he will, then it's time to put our American people first.
Okay. With the most recent school shooting in Parkland, Florida, we are once again talking about school safety. What, if anything, should the federal government do to protect our children at school?
One thing certainly is the mental health. A lot of times we say it is the gun, it's the firearm. And yes, that is the means to use to have these heinous crimes and these tragedies. But we have to look at the individuals too. With that, you have to have an investment in mental health across the country. And it goes into our education system so that these individuals were able to identify whether or not they have a problem early and be able to give them the care that they need. Number two, we have to look at our school safety in terms of infrastructure. How can we invest in safer schools, whether that be locks on the doors, the glass that is bulletproof, or whatever it might be. In terms of law enforcement, investing in the ability for law enforcement to identify when there's a critical problem, like with this case in Parkland, Florida, where he was posting on Facebook and posting on social media, whatever it was, saying that he's going to do this, reports being made to law enforcement saying, hey, there's an issue here, and no action being taken. So we have to make investments in that area and allow the care to go through to that individual and be able to say, look, law enforcement knows that this person needs some help, let's get them the help. Education system, our teachers, our counselors know that this person has a propensity to maybe do something, let's get them the help.
Okay. Should any type of guns, ammo clips, or ammunition be banned?
I think that's we can have that discussion based on what we're talking about, if it is the problem. But again, the problem is that individual that gets their hand on the firearm. We've seen cases where there was an individual in Las Vegas with a bump stock, so there's been this call to ban bump stocks. We've seen individuals that say, oh, these are assault rifles, so let's ban automatic weapons. Well, automatic weapons are already banned. These assault rifles are some of them are just like hunting rifles, others are like shotguns. We've seen these cases. One instance, the individual had pistols in his hand. In New York, the individual had a truck. We have to address the cause of this at the individual. That's where it is.
Okay. The United States is involved in numerous foreign wars, which has resulted in numerous refugees. What do you think we should do with these refugees?
Well, first off, we as the United States of America are a welcoming country. And we have to look at a priority of refugees as to why they have become such. Again, I spoke about in Iraq and Syria, ISIS targeting religious minorities. Under our refugee laws, we look at those that were persecuted for whether it be religious persecution, the Chaldeans in Iraq, and the Assyrians, the Yazidis, and political persecution. So I think when we look at refugees, we have to look at that first. Now, there are many areas that are war-torn, and people have become displaced simply by virtue of the land that they live in and their own political leaders fighting each other. We can lend some help to create peace. That's an objective of the United States, is to have peace across the world. But as far as refugees, when we're talking about individuals coming to our country, we have to put a priority, one, to make sure that we can vet them, to make sure that they're not a danger to our own homeland, and two, that they actually qualify under the refugee laws, which are, have you been religiously persecuted?
Okay. Do you think the United States should be involved in all the foreign wars that we're in right now?
Certainly, the United States has an objective to make sure that there's peace out there. And why? It's because that their own wars don't come to our homeland. Additionally, from an economic standpoint, we need stability in the world. If you remember, during some of the Middle East wars, our gas prices started to fluctuate, that were hurting our own American people. Peace across the world is probably a goal, I think, that everyone wants. Should we be involved in every circumstance, in every instance? I don't know if we really should be. But if someone is a threat, or a country is a threat, or their volatility is a threat to our nation, then it is our United States duty to make sure that we can protect our people here at home.
Do you support building the wall?
Yes, build a big, beautiful wall. And while we're at it, why don't we cement fill those tunnels over the Mexican-United States border underneath, where individuals are being trafficked, human trafficking, where there's drugs that's being trafficked into our country. And these drugs aren't just your marijuana. These are your fentanyl, carfentanil, your heroin. And what do we see when these substances come over to the United States? Our people are dying from overdoses. And they're dying because of these poison that's coming across from underneath our border. So while we're at it, let's fill those tunnels as well. And let's create other national security. Because people can cross a border from on top of the land, from underneath the land, but also through an airplane. So we need to make sure that when individuals are coming to our country, that they're not a threat, that they're not going to commit a terrorist act, that they will be, if they're looking to live here and reside here, that they're productive members of society. And so we need it on three sides. Our immigration vetting side, our side from our border and the wall so that illegal trespass is not occurring, and from our tunnels so that any poison is not coming into our country to kill our youth and our people here.
Do you consider Edward Snowden a hero or a traitor?
Oh, he's not a hero.
Okay. Now, what's your view of the NSA collecting all the data and basically spying on American citizens?
There has to be restrictions. There has to be restrictions. Right now, it almost seems as though it's unfettered. And I don't think the framers of our Constitution wanted to have an unfettered, unaccountable government continuing to spy. With that being said, there has to be some lines drawn so that we, as the general American public, are safe. Where that line is, I think in Congress I'll be able to look deeper in and say, wait a minute, now we're really crossing the line of due process, of our constitutional rights, of search and seizures, of spying in on your regular resident who's going about their day.
Okay. What should be done with illegal immigrants that are here now, should there be a path to citizenship? And we just have a few seconds left, so try and be brief.
You know, the president came out with his plan to have a pathway to citizenship, especially for the dreamers. I like to look at it like this. Why are we going to create more incentive for people to come to our country illegally? Maybe there's some sort of deal that the president wants to talk about being brokered, but a pathway to citizenship, I haven't bought into. Because all it will do is create an incentive for other people to come here in an illegal fashion. And we talked about even playing fields. How about the people who are waiting in line, waiting their turn for years and years to go through our immigration process to come here legally. And yet, people are taking advantage of the system. They're coming in here illegally and then claiming we want the right to citizenship. A lot comes with that. A lot comes with that. It's a privilege as well.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking your time to come on my show, and best of luck with you.
Thank you, Paul.